This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, the North Koreans are again escalating tensions and, frankly, spoiling for war. That is, with the testing of a 120 megatron, allegedly atomic bomb that rocked South Korea over the weekend.
And parts of Japan, and I mean, it was crazy.
So what are the options that President Trump and his national security team have? There's a differing opinion, as you would suggest, some more bellicose than others. James Mattis, Secretary of Defense, had this to say about any more from North Korea, including threatening any U.S. territory or any U.S. allies like the South Koreans, like the Japanese. Here's what the response from the U.S. will be, according to Secretary Mattis.
We have many military options, and the President wanted to be briefed on each one of them. We made clear that we have the ability to defend ourselves and our allies, South Korea and Japan, from any attack, and our commitments among the allies are ironclad. Any threat to the United States or its territories, including Guam, or our allies, will be met with a massive military response, a response both effective and overwhelming.
Massive response, massive military response, effective and overwhelming. That sounds very much like what former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, proposed on Fox over the weekend, which he suggests is the only diplomatic option that President Trump has, and it's interesting to call this a diplomatic option, but the end of the regime in North Korea.
I think the only diplomatic option left is to end the regime in North Korea by effectively having the South take it over. I think you've got to argue to China.
That's not really diplomatic. As far as they're concerned.
Well, that's their problem, not ours. Because anybody who thinks that more diplomacy with North Korea or sanctions, whether against North Korea or an effort to apply sanctions against China, is just giving North Korea more time to increase its nuclear arsenal, increase its ballistic missile capability, increase the accuracy of its guidance systems, and put us, South Korea, and Japan in more jeopardy. We have fooled around with North Korea for 25 years, and fooling around some more is just going to make matters worse.
Yeah. And then the UN Security Council had an emergency meeting yesterday, and Nikki Haley said, I mean, he's fixing for a fight, Kim Jong-un.
We must now adopt the strongest possible measures. Kim Jong-un's action cannot be seen as defensive. He wants to be acknowledged as a nuclear power. But being a nuclear power is not about using those terrible weapons to threaten others. Nuclear powers understand their responsibilities. Kim Jong-un shows no such understanding. His abusive use of missiles and his nuclear threats show that he is begging for war.
Yeah, okay, begging. I know that was the big headline, begging for war. She's describing what we all know. The question is, what do you do about it? And Bolton and to some extent Mattis are coming from one place. But a more interesting and nuanced, I think more interesting and nuanced approach to this came over the weekend from Gordon Chang, who's a scholar in this area. He is the author of the book Coming Collapse of China. And he talked about, why does China behave the way they behave to essentially condone, if not assist, the North Koreans? Listen to Mr. Chang's explanation and then what he suggests President Trump could do.
Well, because every time North Korea does something provocative, we run to China and ask for their cooperation. We plead with them. We send a Secretary of State or some other high envoy. And that way, the Chinese are able to divert us from our talking about things that matter to us, like South China Sea, predatory trade practices, cyber attacks. We don't discuss those when we're talking about and obsessed with North Korea. So Beijing finds that, at least on a short term, this is very, very advantageous for them.
Short term to keep issues we have with China off the table because we're trying to enlist them to help us with North Korea, right? Now, Chang also says medium term, long term, this is not good. What's happening in North Korea is not good for China. It's not good for anybody, which is why you've seen some emanations from both Russia and China with respect to this rogue regime. Now, what can be done about it? You heard from Mattis and Bolton. Listen to Gordon Chang. He said there's a lot more room when it comes to economic sanctions that have a daisy chain effect. Listen to what Mr. Chang suggests.
No, I think the next step is a non-kinetic one. We need to go to the Security Council and ask for a complete embargo. And if the Chinese and the Russians delay, what we need to do is put severe costs on Moscow and Beijing. And we can certainly do that because the largest Chinese banks, like Bank of China, which was named in a 2016 UN report, they've been money laundering for the North Koreans. And President Trump, by designating them a primary money laundering concern, can effectively put a death sentence on the largest Chinese institutions. That would throw the Chinese financial system into turmoil, rock the economy, and maybe even bring down the Communist Party. So we have the tools to do this. We just don't have the political will, Pete.
The tools are interesting. The implications of those tools bring down the Communist Party in China. That's a big statement. But I like the broad strokes that Gordon Chang is sketching out to help us make sense of all of these opinions in the context of the threat posed by North Korea. We're pleased to be joined again by our friend Michael Rubin. Of course, he is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, the author of a number of books, including Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising, former Pentagon official. Michael, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan.
So are you, I mean, I hate to, kind of boil this down to binary, but are you more in the Bolton camp where regime change is the only option, sort of South Korean takeover is the only option, or does some of what Gordon Chang had to say make sense to you?
I'm going to cop out on this one and basically say both are right.
Okay.
Here's the issue. And regime change should certainly be a goal. Regime preservation, the flip side of regime change, Bolton is right. It hasn't done us any good over the last 25 years. But what John Bolton isn't saying, and frankly what Gordon Chang isn't saying, is the real vulnerability here isn't that North Korea is going to drop a nuclear bomb on Guam, on Japan, or even on Seoul, South Korea. But Seoul, South Korea is a city like Chicago, and North Korea is only about 30 miles away. And so you got a situation where it would be as if North Korea really wanted to create havoc, they could just take conventional artillery and launch it at Seoul, South Korea. It would be like launching at Chicago from Gary, Indiana, and figure they're going to hit something. That's what everyone is afraid of. So the question is whether our anti-missile defenses are good enough before we do that. But I think Gordon Chang is on the right track. Look, North Korea, the only reason it survives is because China gives it that pressure relief. And China needs to know in no uncertain terms, hey, we're not going to put up with this anymore. The return address is you. I mean, basically, the analogy I would make, Dan and Amy, it's like Hezbollah and Iran. If Hezbollah is making trouble, it's not simply Hezbollah. It's Iran using them as a proxy. We got to understand the diplomacy with China hasn't gone anywhere on this issue. They've been playing good cop, bad cop, all the while trying to bleed us dry, and it's gotten to the crisis point now. And
Russia's pushing for this freeze plan where North Korea freezes their nuclear program and then U.S. and South Korea stop their military exercises. Do you think that's going to have any legs?
Amy, I really don't, because this has happened before. This goes back to the Carter administration, which froze this, and every time this has been frozen, our military cooperation with South Korea and so forth, the fact of the matter is it's made matters worse. Remember, we've already made these concessions. We've pulled our nukes years ago out, I think during the Clinton administration, out of South Korea. So the idea that this is still a provocation is nothing, considering since we pulled our nukes out, that's when North Korea, despite their promises, have gone full speed ahead in developing their nuclear weapons. And in this case, remember, when you hear about an earthquake and the nuclear test took out an earthquake, the difference between an earthquake that's 5 on the Richter scale and 6 on the Richter scale isn't a factor of 1, it's a factor of 10. And so what North Korea has now done is test a bomb that's created an earthquake 10 times more powerful than the last one.
Mm-hmm. And so going back to what Gordon Chang had to say about the potential debilitating effect of a full embargo and the designation of Chinese money launderers as such, that would essentially cripple their ability to operate in the financial world. Do you see the same potential for that approach?
I do see the same potential. I'm not sure whether it would bring down the communist regime, but I think the question on Donald Trump's desk right now is, do you want a trade war or an economic war, so to speak, or do you want a shooting war? And I don't think there's an option beyond those two.
Mm-hmm. And so on that topic, the Wall Street Journal opined on this over the weekend, and I agree with them that, boy, in this context, it makes even less sense than it would in peaceful times for Trump to be essentially arguing for the U.S. to withdraw from a U.S.-South Korea trade deal that was inked prior to his administration.
You know, I absolutely agree with the Wall Street Journal on this. At a time of this sort of crisis, you don't want to pull the rug out from our ally. The fact of the matter is the whole South Korea trade deal probably has been a benefit to the United States as well. And remember, the whole Korean War started when, during the Truman administration, Dean Acheson had basically laid out the willingness of the United States to defend its allies, left out South Korea, and that's when North Korea 6 months later decided to invade. So the last thing you want to do is give the North Korea any hope that they are going to be victorious by this nuclear posturing.
Yeah, it's good.
So how do you think that this is going to end?
Unfortunately, I don't think there's any smooth ending to this. In the past, for 25 years, and this is where Bolton and Nikki Haley get it right, you know, we've just been responding to North Korean bluster effectively with bribes, and Donald Trump has basically said no more bribes, and nor is it wise to have any bribes given North Korean behavior. So the fact of the matter is I think we're heading to a crisis one way or another.
Before we let you go, do we have a crisis brewing in Israel? Report out this weekend that the wife of Bibi Netanyahu, Sarah Netanyahu, expects to be indicted for fraud in the coming months, and Netanyahu himself may potentially be in some legal jeopardy. Is Netanyahu facing a real legal threat to his prime ministership?
You know, he may be, Dan, but the whole nature of a democracy is you have a system in place that can absorb these sorts of shocks, and if Bibi Netanyahu is forced to step down, there's simply going to be a democratically elected leader who's going to rise up in his place. For people that expect this to be a complete about-face in Israel's policy, I think they're wrong, because whether you're left or right on Israel, there's pretty much a security consensus. But Israel's had leaders forced to step down before, and if only the rest of the world, in the Middle East especially, would have leaders who, when they engage in corruption or alleged corruption, are forced to step down when it's proven, the world would be a better place.
Okay. All right. He is Michael Rubin, resident scholar for the American Enterprise Institute, author of a number of books, including Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising. Michael, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Coming up next, the Trumps return to Texas. And what's up with their sheriff? But first, here is your forecast for your back-to-school day for Chicago public school students and everyone that had that nice 3-day weekend. Partly sunny, breezy, cooler. We have a stray shower this afternoon, a high in the upper 60s. And tonight, a low of 52. And for tomorrow, some sun, some clouds, but a shower in place. And even cooler, a high in the mid-60s. So we're going to have the 60s here for a while. Hopefully get back into the 70s by the end of the week. Let's get into our Alarm Detection Systems Traffic Center. Here is the one and only Jim Talamonte. His pencils are sharpened. He's ready to go.
We're ready, Amy. Good morning. Morning, Dan. South side, got a fire which has 103rd Street closed. Wentworth, Perry. Eden's inbound, just a little congestion approaching the Kennedy. Kennedy has scattered delays. 24 minutes, so here to downtown. Outbound 34. It's a little Montrose to the airport. Westbound 190 has delays as well. The Eisenhower is now 42 minutes. Thorndale to downtown, outbound 32. Stevenson, 47 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive, outbound 34. Ryan, 24 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57, 21 minutes, I-80 to the Murray. Bishop 420, eastbound Adams Tollway, jam from the Tri-State to Kennedy. Some airport traffic mixed in. Northwest Indiana's fine. I'm Jim Talamonte in the Alarm Detection